Alright, my friends, let me show you how this character does way more damage than you're supposed to be able to do without ever entering combat or allowing enemies to fight back. Notice that we are hidden and we are currently in real time, not turn-based mode. I've also set all of our Divine Strike actions to activate automatically without us having to confirm their activation. Now we're going to go ahead and shoot this Steel Watcher here. I guess I will have to click Luck of the Far Realms. And we hit the enemy without it activating. I'm just going to pause here while it's going into search mode. And you'll see that unlike the normal use of Divine Strike, where you have to choose which one you get, in this case, we were able to activate all three, leaving ice surfaces on the enemy, adding reverberation to the Steel Watcher, and dealing way more damage than we're supposed to be able to do. As we leave turn-based mode again, we can continuously attack here until the enemies catch us, which with our super high stealth check is not going to happen frequently. So we just get to keep attacking and eventually kill everything before it can react. Alright, let's get to the build. Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, I have a really exciting one for you. Not only is this build both powerful and fun to play in and of itself, with all the magical might and raw power of a cleric and all the damage and utility of a rogue, I also, while building this character, accidentally broke the game entirely. So this character provides great damage and control, has tons of out-of-combat utility, and access to many of the game's most powerful mechanics, all wrapped up in a single package. But on top of that, it also has a really cool bugged interaction, which you don't have to use at all, but players who want to can use it to power up the character even further. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Jacob Delaney for the $2 donation, Jack A for the €5, Tarantula for the $5, and Sebastian Q, Burley, and Pedro Oliveira for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means so much to me. Alright, let's break the game. Now for this build, I want to give you a little bit of background as to how I developed and discovered it, because I think it's kind of cool. If you don't care about any of that and just want to get to the build, feel free, of course, to skip to the next timestamp. But basically, how I came across this build is that in my recent underrated subclasses video, one of the subclasses I talked about was Nature Cleric, which is one of the most powerful classes in the game, generally overlooked by optimizers. One reason I think that Nature Cleric is somewhat overlooked is that their level 8 Divine Strike feature, I said, wasn't a very powerful class feature, because clerics usually don't want to make a lot of attacks, and that one requires you to make weapon attacks. As always, when I say something isn't very powerful, the next thing that I want to do is try to use that thing, because that's how you discover new interactions and new features. So I started building and brewing, trying to make builds based around Divine Strike. And what I discovered was a fun bug where if you use Nature Cleric's Divine Strike outside of combat, normally you only get one of the damage types, but if you use it outside of combat, you get all three damage types. I'm not the first person to discover this bug. A little bit of Googling shows that a couple other people have uncovered it. I think Remus71 did a video about it a few months ago, so shout out to him. But I hadn't known about this bug, and it's really cool. And also, the ability to use Divine Strike with a bonus action as part of the build just makes this character significantly more damaging as well. So that's what the build is based around, but it's cool that it has this bug, and I wanted to give you some background on how I discovered it, because I thought it was just a fun story as to how you can kind of develop new builds. Take features that you think are underexplored or that you yourself may even have said is not particularly powerful, and try to dive into them and build around them. That's how you find new things. I'm using Shadowheart as the example character here because this is of course primarily a cleric build, and I also think Nature Cleric fits pretty well for her from a lore perspective. Astarion, I think, also works pretty well for this build. We're going to be a stealthy character fighting from the shadows, and if you want to maximize your power level, his extra accuracy and his extra damage in the late game will increase the power of all of your attacks dramatically. If you're building this as a custom character, what race you pick mostly doesn't matter. We're going to get all of our armor proficiencies and everything that we need from our class levels. But if you play as a drow, they get inherent hand crossbow proficiency, which can let you delay your rogue level until later if that works better with your party composition. And of course, Dwergar's out of combat invisibility will allow this character to stealth even more successfully all of the time, so makes the most powerful choice from a mechanical perspective. Of course, other great choices like Wood Elf, Half Wood Elf, or Halfling to reroll ones are always great options, and Half Elf for other than Shadowheart, or Shadowheart as an origin character with the ability to respec your cantrip to Booming Blade will give you a pretty potent melee attack in addition to our powerful ranged attack. So those are some great options, but of course you can pick whatever you want for flavor reasons. At first level, we're going to start with a level of Rogue. This gives us a lot of additional options for the early game. Firstly, it gives us hand crossbow proficiency, so we're always going to be able to make an offhand attack. This character will play primarily as a pretty standard cleric for the first few levels, but with the addition of the extra offhand attack by using a pair of hand crossbows, you're going to be doing a lot more damage than a normal cleric would be doing, even in the early game. The utility that you get from having the expertise in sleight of hand and stealth for the early game as well is not to be overlooked. A one level dip in Rogue for a standard cleric build is a pretty powerful choice regardless, so even before we get the combination online for this character, we're already getting a lot out of taking our Rogue level. For our ability score selection, this character gets to get away with the greedy attribute split because we only need Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom in order to make the character function. So we're going to go ahead and take 17 starting Dexterity, 16 starting Wisdom, and 15 starting Constitution. If you're really hurt about these odd numbers, you can take 12 strength in the early game and then respec to this point once you're able to get your ASI and even out the odd numbers. Mostly doesn't matter because all it is a little extra early game jump distance, so for the purpose of the guide, I'm just going to show with this attribute split, but if you want to get a very slight optimization, that respec is okay. For our abilities, we are going to take acrobatics, because with this character's low strength, we don't want to be vulnerable to being pushed around. And then we're going to take expertise in sleight of hand and stealth. This character will have a lot of opportunity to play as a stealth archer, which means that we're going to get a lot of free damage in before combat starts. Even in the early game, you can have this character make several attacks before combat begins and you finally fail your stealth checks. And then as you get more bonuses to your stealth skill in the later game, you're going to be able to often end fights before they even start by rolling high stealth checks here. The fourth skill, we're just going to use we're just going to take perception. This gives you the ability to find traps, and as your sleight of hand character, having perception and sleight of hand together, we're a high wisdom character as well, so we're going to be really good at perception, means that your party will never have to worry about traps, even from the very beginning of the game. So we're almost always going to take an ability score setup and a skill setup that looks like this. That's it for our decisions at level 1. Let's move on to level 2. At character level 2, we're immediately going to multiclass and take our first level of Cleric. Of course, for our subclass, we already talked about this, we're going to take Nature Domain Cleric, which gives us a lot of cool options. Now, normally, the Shillelagh cantrip is a pretty big part of your setup on this character, and it can still increase your damage depending on your exact weapons. When you first get this, Shillelagh plus a torch is probably going to be more damage than any finesse weapons that you might be using. But if you want to make melee attacks on this character, you do have very high dexterity, so you can also just use finesse weapons. But this will, again, be a little bit more damage in the early game. Also, don't forget that you can cast this before combat and then still make a bonus action offhand attack. Attack with your staff or club, attack with your torch that you have in the main hand, then still make a bonus action offhand attack with a dagger or with an offhand hand crossbow, because a dagger and a torch are both light weapons, so you can wield both of them. For your cantrip selection here, we are, of course, going to be picking up Guidance. It's even better on this character than on other characters because we're really good at rolling skill checks. You can even use this for stealth if you pre-cast it. As your lockpicking character, having Guidance is just going to make you even better at that. We're also going to take Resistance. Resistance is pretty helpful for a lot of events, and this character will want to be able to participate in some of those late game events where you want to have high saving throws for dialogues or story choices. So of course resistance is great there. And then we're gonna take Toll the Dead. This character will mostly be using ranged weapons for its ranged damage sources, but having a non-weapon source of damage for if an enemy is resistant to piercing damage, or you want to be able to deal damage to an enemy with really high armor class but a low wisdom save, is going to give you even more versatility as well. For our Nature Cleric cantrip, we're taking Shillelagh, like we already discussed, though in the late game you might want to respec for Thorn Whip, which will be more useful in the end game, but early game Shillelagh is going to be better. And then, at time of recording, Cleric is still bugged and gets 2 extra skill proficiencies if you multi-class into it at later levels. And Nature Cleric also gets an extra skill, so this ability screen is kind of weird, because if you try to select, it shows 3 skills, but 2 of them have to be knowledge skills available to Cleric. So medicine, history, etc. And then one of them is a Nature Cleric specific skill, like animal handling or survival. So if you try to select all 3 of these, it won't work. So what you're going to do is take medicine, survival, and history, or medicine, animal handling, and history in order to navigate through this screen successfully, thanks to the weird bugs with Cleric skills. Finally, for our prepared spells at this level, just like every other cleric, we get tremendous benefit from using command. And again, because we have our bonus action offhand attacks, we can command an enemy to drop prone and then attack them with advantage with a bonus action. So we do even better than most other characters. We're also going to take Healing Word as a bonus action. Bless, we're going to be making actual attacks on this character, so blessing ourselves and our party members is even higher value than it normally is. And finally, Sanctuary as a great defensive option. This character has the incredible benefit that you can Sanctuary yourself and then run away and then go into stealth, and enemies won't be able to target you while you're in the process of running away, and then you can go into stealth to leave combats that are going badly. So not only do you get to play a stealthy, cagey style where you don't really enter bad engagements, you can also leave them very easily, thanks to Cleric's defensive abilities and Rogue's defensive abilities stacking together. At character level 3, we're taking our second level of Cleric, which for Nature Cleric doesn't give us anything in particular that's very strong. Charm Animals and Plants is usually not going to be that useful, so while Turn Undead comes up, the real power of Nature Cleric kicks in at level 3. With our third level of Nature Cleric, we get access to second level spells, but in particular, as a Nature Cleric, we also get Spike Growth. Spike Growth is one of the best spells in the early game, and is particularly strong both for clerics in general and for this character in particular, because melee enemies that are stuck wandering across the Spike Growth, we can also be shooting them with our bows constantly, contributing to extra damage and keeping them trapped inside the Spike Growth, with the difficult terrain that it produces. So enemies who we put Spike Growth on will be able to attack right away, and then we'll almost always be able to kill them before they can meaningfully leave the Spike Growth and actually contribute to combat. This is a game-winning spell, and having access to it on a cleric is already an incredibly powerful tool. In addition to that, we also get the other great level 2 spells that clerics always have access to. We're going to take Hold Person. Again, this is extremely powerful when you're using offhand ranged attacks, because you can cast Hold Person and then use a bonus action crossbow shot for an automatic critical hit, as long as you're within 10 feet. 10 feet is longer than melee range, so you don't have to be in melee range to make use of this. And this, again, is a very powerful tool that not only locks an enemy out of the combat, it also does spectacular damage to them. On top of that, we're also going to prepare Spiritual Weapon. Works very well with Spike Growth, because it flies over the Spike Growth. Enemies will often get distracted fighting it, keeping them in the Spike Growth for longer, or it will just be able to keep whacking at them as they slowly make their way out of it. Now, up until this point, we've played as a pretty classic cleric with a 1-level dip in rogue for some additional damage and utility. Already a very reasonable character, but this is where things start to take a different turn. At Character level 5, we're taking our 4th level of Cleric, and we get an extra cantrip here. Which cantrip we take mostly doesn't matter. You can pick up Sacred Flame if you want to lean into more Radiating Orb shenanigans, which of course are very powerful on this character, as they are on any character that can do radiant damage. You could also take Blade Ward if you want more defensively oriented cantrip. That could be good as well if you are playing this character as a solo honor mode character, which is totally viable. It just gives you a panic button if you happen to drop out of stealth and get caught for a round of enemy attacks. The real difference, though, is that for our feat, we're going to take Sharpshooter. We've already talked extensively about how we're using a pair of hand crossbows on this character, and adding 20 extra damage every turn that we're firing both hand crossbows is incredible. It also makes our offhand attacks extremely damaging. We have Bless as a cleric to offset the damage penalty, so we can cast Command, dropping an enemy prone, and then make a blessed, advantaged sharpshooter attack against them for a ton of damage. It works very well with our hold person effects as well, so it just vastly increases the amount of damage that this character is doing at very little penalty, because we have lots of ways to offset the attack penalty, and we're often attacking from stealth at the beginning of combat as well. At level 6, we're taking our 5th level of Cleric, and of course this is again a massive power spike, as for any Cleric, but especially for Nature Cleric, which gets Sleet Storm and Plant Growth as its additional spells. Both of these are incredibly premium crowd control spells, and again work extremely well with our ranged combat plan. Enemies who are falling over on Sleet Storm or trapped moving at 1/4 speed in Plant Growth are going to be taking consistent very high damage from our sharpshooter attacks. And so we can use these spells to set up our main plan of dealing a bunch of damage. Everything that this character does all works together, which is one of the really cool things about it. For prepared spells at this level, we're also going to add in Glyph of Warding and, of course, Spirit Guardians. Even though this character is more focused on being at range, there are lots of fights where there's lots of AoE damage from enemies, and Spirit Guardians is also a great way to discourage melee enemies from coming towards you. It gives enemies a really bad choice of staying at range and getting shot multiple times by your crossbows and taking ranged cantrips and command spells, or coming in close and taking Spirit Guardians damage. So even though this character isn't going to be in the mix as much as other clerics, it still works very well to have Spirit Guardians available. At character level 7, we're taking our 6th level of Nature Cleric, which gets us Dampen Elements. Being able to have incoming elemental damage as a reaction on you or an ally is also really powerful. This character is surprisingly good defensively for a dexterity-based character. Cleric gets a decent amount of hit points every level, and especially once we put our extra point into Constitution, or if we're using the Constitution necklace, then we'll have a pretty high hit point total. And because we have Sanctuary, we have bonus action hides, dashes, and disengages at later levels, and high dexterity for high armor class and high initiative, this character is going to very rarely be in trouble from enemy actions. Dampen Elements gives us yet another avenue to avoid incoming damage, so it's another synergistic defensive effect alongside this character's potent offense. Granted, you won't usually need defensive effects because this character never has to actually enter initiative order at all if you're just making stealth archery attacks, but having it is really good for when you get into a more traditional combat. Character level 8, we're taking our 7th level of Cleric, and as a Nature Cleric, we get Dominate Beast and Grasping Vine. Now, Dominate Beast is, of course, a pretty weak spell. Grasping Vine does have its uses. It's a bonus action, and it can really distract enemies that you're shooting with arrows, so it's reasonable to cast in some encounters. It also comes with inherent difficult terrain and entangle effects that surround the Grasping Vine summon. After the buff, this spell is still not great, but there are some encounters where it's pretty useful. For our prepared spells at this level, we're going to take all the ones that we had before, but add in Guardian of Faith. Now, this is also a really good spell for distracting enemies, blocking corridors and stuff. Putting Guardian of Faith along with a Spike Growth out there, is both a lot of damage and can prevent enemies from easily pathing out of the spike growth if you put it in a doorway. And again, you're doing this all while showering arrows onto enemies, assuming that you want to enter combat at all. In addition to that, we'll also add freedom of movement. This character can snap allies out of stuns using freedom of movement, or you can just self-cast it if you are playing this as a solo character. Being able to have freedom of movement cast on yourself is pretty powerful for a solo character, so just the ability to cast it is always nice. In a party, you won't cast this at the beginning of the day, but if this is your only character, you usually will. Then, at character level 9, we get to increase our damage even further, and get access to the bug that I was talking about. So, Divine Strike Elemental Fury is a pretty overlooked ability. In fact, I overlooked it before I was making this build. It says in the tooltip here that as you level up, that it's only on melee attacks, but it actually applies on melee or ranged attacks. And how it works is that once per turn, you can choose to deal 1d8 cold, 1d8 fire, or 1d8 lightning damage, in addition to your weapon's normal damage. You can use this with an offhand attack from a hand crossbow, so now we have plus 10 damage from Sharpshooter, plus 1d8 damage from Divine Strike, which will also again be doubled if the enemy has been hit by hold person, and we're critically hitting against them, or if we just happen to roll into a critical, and we're probably going to be using gear that increases our critical hit chance as well. The cool thing, though, is that there is also a bug with this ability, where if you are not in combat and not in turn-based mode, instead of only getting to choose one of the 3 damage types, you get all 3. So every time we fire from stealth archery, we're going to be getting 3d8 extra rainbow damage to the enemy. These are also very relevant damage types. Lightning and cold damage both have a ton of item synergies available in the game. Cold damage can, of course, be doubled with the wet condition, though it will also have the fire damage that you're doing. But if you double 1d8 and have another d8, then you're still getting more damage on average. And this will overall increase your damage output enormously if you want to use the bug. You don't need to. Just having Divine Strike and Sharpshooter for offhand hand crossbow attacks on an otherwise fairly normal cleric is already a really powerful increase to your damage, and gives clerics a great use for their bonus action, which clerics on turns where they're not casting Sanctuary or Healing Word don't always have important bonus actions. But having a hand crossbow means you always have something good to do, and because we've increased its damage so much, it's always going to be really powerful. But it also gives you access to one of the most hilarious and consistent, if buggy, out-of-combat damage sources in the game if you want to lean all in on stealth archery. In addition to Elemental Fury, we also, of course, get a feat here, and we're going to take an ability score improvement to go up to 18 dexterity and even out our constitution. Up until this point, you probably will have wanted to be in the Graceful Cloth just to have a little more dexterity. Or you can play this character in heavy armor as more of a standard cleric. Either of those work because you have heavy armor proficiency from Nature Cleric. Either of those options work very well, depending on your exact party composition. At this point, though, you're going to want to transition to medium or light armor in order to make use of your high dexterity. At this point, we have a lot of different options for how we could progress the character further, so there's a lot of different choices for our next level. We could take 3 levels of Gloomstalker Ranger for archery fighting style and an extra attack on the first turn of combat. We could take levels in Fighter in order to get archery fighting style and action surge for more damage and more spellcasting. We could continue to level up in Cleric. Just going to Cleric level 11 makes us a fully featured Cleric, while also getting all of the additional damage stuff that we've gotten from Rogue's hand crossbow proficiency and all of that as well. For this build, I'm going to continue to level in Rogue. This gives us more options in combat because Cunning Action, Hide, Dash, and Disengage are incredible for any character that is doing what this character is doing. Being able to run away while still shooting our bows, being able to cast a spell and then hide afterwards with a bonus action is awesome, and just making the character more mobile is incredible. It's also great with Spirit Guardians, giving you a lot more distance that you can cover in a single turn, so you can hit more enemies with Spirit Guardians. And I think that it is cool and plays really well with how the build is playing in order to take more rogue levels. But I wanted to mention that there's a lot of different directions that you can go with the character for the last 3 levels. Then, at character level 11, we're going to take our 3rd rogue level, and this gets us Thief Rogue. So now instead of making 1 offhand attack, we are able to make 2 offhand attacks every turn, or cast a spell, make an attack, and then still bonus action hide. Thief Rogue's extra bonus action is amazing for spellcasters. This is an interaction that I think is often overlooked, but the ability to cast a spell and then bonus action hide and then still do something else with your other bonus action is incredible. So not only is it great for characters that are using a pair of hand crossbows to double effectively your damage output, a little less for this character because you only get Divine Strike on 1 attack per turn in combat. It also has a ton of utility. It makes you much better in actual combats as well, and while this character can plan to never enter initiative order, I personally find pure stealth archery that never enters traditional combats a little bit boring, so I like to level the character in a way where we can take actual combats as well as just kill unaware enemies. And then finally, at level 12, we can take our 4th rogue level in order to take an ASI to hit 20 dexterity. We could also, because mostly the extra dexterity we only care about for our hit chance, take a fighter level, and that would give us archery fighting style, or even 2 weapon fighting style if you're mostly not in combat. So it doesn't matter if you miss attacks. 2 weapon fighting style is going to be more damage overall, so you can take that. If you are entering combat, then taking a fighter level I think is usually still better than the 4th rogue level, because the +2 to hit is better than +1 to hit that you get from the ASI, and the bonus to hit chance is mostly what you care about. Though the rogue level is also still pretty reasonable, and if you find that you're losing initiative a lot, then that's another choice that you can make. But for this version of the build, we're going to take archery fighting style in order to get even more accuracy. Another option as well, just to give you all of the options, is you can use Ethel's Hair in order to still hit 20 dexterity while also getting the fighter level. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the items section. Alright, my friends, that's the build, but of course we can make it more powerful with items, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, you have some of the most expansive and open itemization options in the game. So before I say anything else, I'm going to say, with this character, have fun with it. Use the cool items that you have wanted to use, but haven't really found a home for, because this character, with extra bonus actions, with great actions every turn, with the ability to make a bonus action attack, so even if you spend an action on an item that is less impactful and more fun, you'll still have good stuff to do every turn. And you make really good use of a lot of the strong items in the game, so definitely go wild. There's obviously good items that you can pick, and I'll talk about the best items here, but this is a character that can really be very open as to what items you select. You can kind of tell that by how many items I've chosen to highlight as available for this character. So firstly, of course, we're built around using a pair of hand crossbows, so we're going to need a pair of hand crossbows. The best ones in the game are the Hellfire hand crossbow and the hand crossbow +2, so usually you're going to want to end up using these in the end game. The Nair Misser is a good option as well. Magic Missile is actually kind of a nice spell for this character, a level 3 magic missile, and the force damage can be pretty useful also. So this also makes a pretty solid option, and especially if you're not using the ballast armor, so you don't specifically need piercing damage, then the Nair Misser can be a very good alternative to the 2 here as well. One important thing about this character is put your strongest hand crossbow, which will usually be the Hellfire, on your offhand, not on your main hand, because you're going to be attacking much more frequently with your offhand attack than with your main hand attack. So make sure that you put the Hellfire hand crossbow in your offhand, not in your main hand, as you might intuitively expect to. Outside of the pair of hand crossbows, there are a lot of really powerful different options for this character. You're going to want a piece of armor that allows you to use your high dexterity and gives you good defensive capabilities. So for armor, the Armor of Agility is going to be a great option if you want to play a little more defensively. If you intend to actually enter combat and not just play purely from stealth archery, then the Armor of Agility is probably going to be your go-to choice. The Graceful Cloth is also really good, and if you're planning to play mostly in stealth, the Graceful Cloth is your best option, because that'll give you 20 dexterity. Doesn't matter that it'll give you relatively low defenses, because you're never actually allowing enemies to attack anyways, and you can use the fact that you have archery fighting style, 20 dex, and all of that, in order to land your sharpshooter attacks more reliably. Finally, of course, the Ballast Armor is incredible for any character that's doing a lot of piercing damage, which this one is. Note that another important thing is that the Nature Cleric's Spike Growth also piercing damage. So making enemies vulnerable to piercing damage with the aura from the Ballast Armor, whether it's on you or on an ally who's fighting in closer, also doubles the damage from Spike Growth, in addition to the damage from everything else that you're doing. As with any other cleric, and also because you're able to do a bunch of lightning damage with your attacks, the Reverberation and Radiating Orb item set can let you apply a ton of debuffs to enemies. So this is the Gloves of Belligerent Skies, the Boots of Stormy Clamor, the Callous Glow Ring, the Coruscation Ring, and the Luminous Armor. Together, these 5 pieces will mean that whenever you deal lightning damage, which you're doing with your attacks, whenever you deal radiant damage, you're going to apply, which you can do with Spirit Guardians, or also with the Callous Glow Ring, which lets you do radiant damage on every attack. You're going to apply Reverberation. When you add a condition, you'll also apply Reverberation. When you deal radiant damage, you're going to apply Radiating Orbs with the Luminous Armor, and every attack will do radiant damage thanks to the Callous Glow Ring. Does +2 damage, and this damage is radiant even though it's not listed in the tooltip. The Coruscation Ring is less important to this character, so you might want to swap it out for the Snowburst Ring or the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, because you aren't doing direct spell damage that often, but it is very powerful. Another fun thing with this item set is, again, it works with Spike Growth, so you're going to be applying a lot of these debuffs off of the Spike Growth damage as well. Similarly, in terms of powerful item set options, as any character that is making both weapon attacks and casting spells, you can use the Helmet of Arcane Acuity and the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel. Whenever you deal damage with a weapon attack, and remember you're doing this at least twice a turn with your 2 bonus actions, you can gain Arcane Acuity, making the save DCs on your spells higher. The Band of the Mystic Scoundrel can let you cast Hold Person as a bonus action, Command or Hold Person as a bonus action, with illusion or enchantment spells. So it's very easy to set up turns where this character either builds a lot of Arcane Acuity before the fight starts by attacking from stealth, or uses 1 offhand attack for 2 Arcane Acuity stacks, then casts Hold Person with a bonus action, then makes a main hand attack, or casts Hold Person, makes 2 offhand attacks, and then can, in future turns, cast multiple spells while continuing to stack Arcane Acuity. This character, with your many attacks, is again one of the best characters at using these effects. Arcane Acuity increasing your spell save DC, and the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel letting you cast Cleric's extremely powerful spells as bonus actions. So, once again, we have access to another one of the most broken item combinations in the game. It doesn't stop there, though, because we also, of course, as a cleric, can use the buff on heal items. So if you want to lean this character more into a supporting role, the Whispering Promise, the Hellrider's Pride, and of course the Whispering Promise and the Hellrider's Pride, will allow you to, whenever you heal an ally, give them Blade Ward and Bless, which this character can both do with its multiple bonus actions with Healing Word or Mass Healing Word if you prepare that spell as well. And of course, if you're using these buff on heal items, you're going to be using those, you're going to be preparing Mass Healing Word. And it can also do it by throwing a potion. And this character, again, is pretty good at throwing a potion with your main action, and then you can use a bonus action to cast a Healing Word, apply these buffs, use your second bonus action to attack and apply all of your bonus damage and your debuffs and everything. Because this character has so many different and powerful ways to use its action economy, you get a lot out of anything that works off of any specific action that you can take. So any item that adds an effect to something that you're just doing so many things, those items increase in value. That segues nicely into yet another possible item combination. The Drakethroat Glaive and the Snowburst Ring. So the Drakethroat Glaive, you can enchant your weapons, in this case your hand crossbows, to deal cold damage, and then with the Snowburst, which you also do off of your Divine Strike, and with the Snowburst Ring, you deal cold damage. Whenever you deal cold damage, you create an ice surface underneath the enemy. So if you were to fire your offhand attack, you can create an ice surface while also casting a spell with your full action, or just making another attack. So your bonus actions will now be hard crowd control abilities, in addition to the incredible damage you're doing. Now, obviously, you're not going to be able to use all of these item combinations at once. At the end of the item section, I'll go over what I think the optimal items are. But I wanted to talk about how you can use some of the most powerful item combos in the game on this character, because your itemization is so open. For some other powerful items for this character, your melee weapons you can either make more offensive with things like the Knife of the Undermountain King, increasing your chance to critically hit. This is better especially if you are purely fighting from stealth, so the Knife of the Undermountain King and the Bloodthirst Dagger. Ignore the name here, that the name is just an artifact of spawning this item in this save. But this is the Bloodthirst Dagger that gives you an extra chance to critically hit. The passives of these weapons work on our ranged attacks, so we'll be able to critically hit more often with all of our ranged attacks. This pair of light weapons you can just keep equipped, and you can just make your hand crossbow attacks with greater chances to critically hit. If you want to lean more into spellcasting, and if you want the character to act more in actual combats, rather than just playing purely from stealth, of course you're still a spellcaster, so Markahesh Gear and Ketheric's Shield to give yourself bonus spell save DC are very powerful options as well, and if you are playing more as a more standard cleric, that's just making offhand attacks, this is also a great option, leaning less into the pure damage aspects of the character and more into the control aspects. For your amulet, a couple options here. The Amulet of Greater Health is also a great option, of course, just giving you quite a lot more defensive capabilities. Another option for this character is to use Khalid's Gift. So you started with 17 Dexterity and 15 Wisdom. You can use Khalid's Gift as your amulet to hit 16 Wisdom, and use Ethel's Hair to hit 18 Dexterity, and then hit 20 Dexterity with only 1 ASI if you use those two attribute increase items. So that's a way that you can get 20 Dexterity if you want to dedicate Ethel's Hair to this character. It's not at all necessary, but it is an option that you definitely have. Finally, another couple items that I think are very much worth mentioning for this character. The Diadem of Arcane Synergy. If you're not using the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, then you're going to be inflicting a lot of conditions and making a lot of weapon attacks, so adding extra damage to all of your weapon attacks is really powerful. Of course, you have a bunch of other helmet options as well. The Fistbreaker Helm can help fix your relatively low initiative. By the way, this character doesn't really need initiative gear or dexterity because you're starting every fight from stealth. So you're going to take the first turn because of surprise in almost every combat, so you don't need alert or initiative gear as much as normal characters would. But increased initiative is still good. The Fistbreaker Helm gives you spell save DC and initiative, or you could go for the Hood of the Weave just for bonus spell save DC. Or a more defensive option like the Helm of Baldurin, if you're finding that you are getting stunned and getting critically hit, then the Helm of Baldurin is good. Remember, this character has armor proficiency in everything, so you can use even medium or heavy armor pieces if you find that you need the extra defenses. Another good option is the Covert Cowl. If you are playing purely as a stealth character, the Covert Cowl again just increases your critical hit chance. Also, another couple items that are worth mentioning, especially for the early game. The Gloves of Archery just give you extra ranged damage in the early game. If you don't have another dedicated archer, you can use these instead of the Hellrider's Pride if you're not doing a lot of healing. Falara Louv is both pretty reasonable for this character to carry, since you don't really need another weapon. You can be the Falara Louv carrier for your party, or for your party members to just add more damage with the Shriek ability. That means that all of your multiple attacks are going to be doing just a little bit of extra damage. Also, it works very well with Spirit Guardians later in the game. Finally, the Ring of Arcane Synergy is also quite solid. You're going to be dealing damage with a cantrip, so just like the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, the Ring of Arcane Synergy is a great alternative option as well. For the most powerful endgame item set, I think that this character is best played primarily as a stealth archer, which means we're leaning more into the stealth archery aspects of the character. In that case, we're going for a slightly hybrid itemization. So we're going to be using the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, of course, because it makes all of our spells basically irresistible, and hold persons and commands with Arcane Acuity are some of the most powerful things that you can do in the game. To combine with that, we're using the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, and we're also using the Snowburst Ring, which the save DC against falling over will benefit from Arcane Acuity as well, and all of our save DC stuff. So enemies are going to be falling prone pretty frequently. Alongside the Snowburst Ring, of course, we're going to be enchanting our bows with the Drakethroat Glaive to make sure that we're able to trigger the cold damage even on turns when we're not using our Divine Strike. We're also using the Amulet of Greater Health. It just prevents this character from being one-shot, and especially if you're playing as a solo character, it can be pretty helpful. But it's also pretty nice for this character just to make sure that you don't drop concentration on an important spell, and that even if enemies do catch you, you always at least get one turn to Sanctuary, run away, and stealth again. We're using the Ballast Armor in order to double the damage with our piercing shots, either on ourselves or on an ally. If you're playing this in a party, you might want to use the Graceful Cloth in the end game and have the Ballast Armor, or if you did the Ethel's Hair thing, use the Armor of Agility. So your armor is going to depend use the Ballast Armor on an ally if you're playing in a party. So your armor is going to depend a little on whether you're solo or in a party, and whether you used Ethel's Hair, in which case you want the Armor of Agility, but one of these three armor sets, dependent on those things, is going to be where you end up. We're going to use the Gloves of Belligerent Skies and the Boots of Stormy Clamor in order to maximize our debuffing potential. And then we're also going to use the Blade of the First Blood, the Bloodthirst Dagger and the Knife of the Undermountain King in order to maximize our critical hit chance, which means that we're going to do the most possible damage outside of combat before we ever fail our stealth check and enemies detect us. Finally, for our weapons, we'll be using the Hand Crossbow +2. I have to actually pick the right one here. The Hand Crossbow +2 and the Hellfire Hand Crossbow, making sure to have the Hellfire Hand Crossbow in the offhand because it's generally the more powerful one. So that should give you some idea of what you're going to be doing in the end game. Though, like I said, this character is extremely customizable in terms of items. So please play around with it. If any of your other party members need any of these items, you can easily swap out this character's items based on what your party members need access to. Because this character is so inherently powerful, the only thing you really need is the hand crossbows. Alright, my friends, I hope you've enjoyed this look at the Stealth Archer Cleric, and kind of fun to be able to find a new, relatively new at least, obviously some other people have discovered this already previously, so it's not completely new, but new to me, a relatively new way to break the game completely. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, then feel free to leave a comment and hit like. Helps me out with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Also, hit the hype button. I still genuinely don't know what it does, but YouTube loves it when you hit buttons, so hit any buttons that you see, and everyone will be happy. Of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Thanks for watching, friends. I'll catch you next time.